Everybody, welcome to another one-on-one conversation here at Film.Music.Media. I'm Kai Savas, and I'm here joined by the amazing composer Sherri Chung. Sherri, thank you so much for joining me for this. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So to start off our conversation, I like to ask a very simple question. You can take it at face value. You can find deeper meaning in it. I'm curious, as a person, as a storyteller, as a musician, as a composer, what does music mean to you?
Oh, we're just jumping right into the existential, I guess,
Yeah, let's
right?
go. Let's go big. Just to start
What
big,
is
then funnel down.
what does music mean to me? I don't know. You know what? Probably everybody says, well, how about this? I don't think that I would say anything novel. You know what I'm saying? I mean, I
Yeah,
do think that music, what is really cool about music, I think, is that it doesn't, it kind of transcends language barriers and cultural barriers, and kind of all the barriers, I think. And so I think there's something really special about it. It's yeah, and I think for me personally too, it's something that I just kind of gravitated towards. When I was growing up, we were in a place financially where it was like you can choose one thing. You can choose sports or dance or music or art, like whatever it is you wanted to. We kind of had to choose like that one extracurricular thing.
yeah,
And music, hands down. So I mean, I guess all that to say is nobody forced me into it, and I didn't have to fight my way into it either. Nobody tried to keep me out. So it was something that I just sort of gravitate towards, as like the sort of all encompassing language, if you will. That's so not
yeah.
novel, but there it is.
No,
That's
no,
also
I mean, I think it is one of those things that it crosses over borders and languages and everything, and it brings so many people together, and you can communicate all sorts of things. But I'm curious. You mentioned that nobody forced you into it. Nobody, you weren't like, prevented from getting into it. It wasn't like something that you were. So I'm curious, how did you discover it? Like, do you remember that point in your life? What was something that first triggered your interest into it? And I guess after that, when did it go from hobby and interest to I want to make this a career?
to obsession, to obsession. Uh, yeah, I was okay. So I was one of those kids. I wanted to do classical piano, and I mean I was like 4 or 5, so I didn't really know what classical piano was. But that, I mean, it was probably just the music that was on the radio with my parents, talk radio kind of thing.
Yeah,
I didn't really come from a particularly musical family, so my mom played the piano a little bit, and we were really involved with the church, so there was a lot of like music there and kind of stuff. So, but I just wanted to take lessons. I wanted to take piano lessons. I wanted to learn how to do it. And she was like, "All right, you weirdo." I mean, like a lot of parents have to like force their kids to do it, and I was like, "No, I had to force my parents into paying for the lessons."
right.
But so yeah, and then I always kind of wanted to do that, and then I think I kind of realized around like 10, 11, 12, 13, so like somewhere around there, I had a really bad performance. Well, it was a classical performance, and it was just really bad. I never really got over it. And I don't really mean that in sort of some sort of like awful, terrible, sad way. It's just like, I just realized this not performing, but classical performing is not for me. I'm not a
Yeah,
person that can get up there and be flawless, like
right.
it's just not my jam. But performing was still really fun. But yeah, so I realized I wanted to be also a lot more creative. And when you grow up playing instruments and you go up, especially classically trained, you know your composers. You learn that
Sure.
composing is a job, it's an occupation, it's something you can do. And so I was like, so I kind of knew that. And then I say this a lot, and whenever I talk, so people probably just they either know it or they're like or they're sick of hearing it. But I don't know. But I saw this movie, Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, with
That
an amazing
I literally
score
was
by
just on a
Michael
panel last
Kidd.
night that I recorded, and someone mentioned that it was James Chappell, and he's like Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves was his like big thing, Michael Kamen.
What? I have to meet him. If you're
Yeah,
out there, we have to meet up because I mean, it's literally what it was my thing. And I had seen movies before, obviously, but just none of them had just gripped me in that way of, like, and I was like, what is this wizardry? I want to do this, but I was young enough where it's like, you don't really pursue, I mean, wasn't going to pursue that kind of career right then and there. So, I ended up going to undergrad for composition and theory and then on to grad school. But all to say that was the one. Michael Kamen's score was like
wow.
the score. I'm like, That's it. That's what I
Yeah,
want
it
to
was
do.
Alex too. I mean, I think he was on our panel too. Alex Garingas and James Chappell were both like talking about Robin Hood, Prince of Thieves, and how they were just so inspired by that score. And I was like, that's awesome. Like,
Yeah, I know. Well, I'm in good company, I guess.
I
That's
know
really
it
cool.
was so
Yeah.
sad because I don't know if you saw the news. Like some like stupid teenager like cut the tree down in England, like the tree that they filmed, like they used in the movie. It's like this ancient old tree, and some asshole came and
I
just
didn't know that.
sawed it off. It really,
Oh,
yeah. I was like,
kids these
I know,
days.
like the tree
Kids,
survived for so
he
long, and then
needs a
just
hobby.
I
He needs
know
a hobby.
it was a bummer. So yeah, so I mean that's an incredible story. Like I mean, I love hearing about people's like kind of paths and inspirational paths and how it takes us. And so I'm curious, once you kind of went, you decided this is what I want to do, and you found composing, and once you kind of got into the world, what were those first steps like? When was it like, okay, I'm done, I'm ready to work? Like, how do you, I guess, what were did you just start scoring shorts? Did you find filmmakers? Did you, and I'm curious what led up to when you started orchestrating and arranging, and then I guess finally meeting Blake and kind of working, in all
Yeah.
in that world.
Yeah, no, totally. I mean, you literally just said it. I mean, I went to graduate school at University of Southern California out here in their scoring for motion picture and television course, which if one knows it, it's a very intense year-long program where you can't really get jobs or work or anything. So, but and it's super
Yeah,
super intense, but it's really great because you just kind of you meet a lot of musicians who are working. You meet a lot of professionals who are just really experts in their field already, and it's a great way to just kind of learn all the things. So Blake Neely was actually one of the advisors there in the year that I was there, and I was really kind of captivated by the way by his approach to writing for scenes, his approach to even just to teaching. It was just I just really resonated not only with his methods but also just the way he was delivering this information. It was just like
yeah,
really it was really cool. So I stayed in touch with him. I use the term I professionally stalked him, for years to come. And so I mean, it wasn't like, I just showed up to like all of his SCL events or any
right.
workshops that he was doing. And he was an advisor at the Sundance Film Music Institute, which I went to in 2010. And just he's one of those things where it's just like every now and then I would just shoot him a little track that I had done, that kind of
Yeah,
thing, until finally, I mean, but to answer your question before he and I started working together, exactly what you said. I had kept in touch with the filmmakers that I had met as a student. Um, and as doing short films, commercials on spec, and then little short film festivals, indie projects, and just
sure.
anything, and as well as also just jumping on other people's teams, like who they had their projects. So let me do some orchestration for you, let me do some parts prep or proofreading or sing on your album, or sing whichever,
Yeah, you're
and
doing vocals and stuff too. Yeah,
yeah, yeah. So I mean, I think for me, and I also did like part time at a copy office whenever they needed, whenever they had a big project, they needed people to help. So I would just do kind of some proofreading or copy work there. So I was kind of just like, and I was also teaching piano at the time as well. So it was a lot of, my goal at the time was just to stay in the music. Like, can I just stay
yeah,
making a living in music? I couldn't make a living solely on writing music, but can I just make a living solely on music in general, whether it's teaching or being a support on someone else's team or being my own lead composer on my own projects. And so it was a lot of, and anyone out there who's still juggling, I mean, you know it, the struggle's
yeah.
real. It's
And
like,
I'm sure,
it's a
and
lot.
I feel like, yeah, I feel like it's, and especially the climate that we're in now with the changes in the industry and how things, especially in LA, have become so expensive. I mean,
Yeah.
yeah, I don't envy anybody who's entering now, because I mean, it's tough, and it was tough
Agreed.
for us. I mean, tough when we, I think we're in the same
Yeah.
age, and then when I remember when I moved to LA like 12 years ago, and it's like that was tough, and I can't imagine you doing it now.
I
But
know.
every generation, I guess, goes through their own, their own struggles. But it's still,
Yeah.
yeah, I think the opportunities are there still, and I think, I know we're going through this crazy shift with the industry and streaming. And even though there's a lot of negative things happening, I'm pretty optimistic about, I think, the
I
future.
agree. I
Yeah,
mean, I agree with all that, and and especially like I think I'm not gonna say, I'm not saying at all that it's easier, this
no,
then or now or whatever. What I'm saying though is that I do think that there's a lot more ways to get involved this time. I mean,
yeah,
this time, like these days,
these days, yeah,
these days, because there's obviously the industry has really widened the platform, right? Like opened the door wider for all kinds of new newer voices, which is really great and important. And they've made an active push for that kind of thing. But also there's a lot of stories being told. There's a lot of content being put out there. And while maybe some of it isn't always, the best, frankly, I mean, hey, it's the same as what we were doing, growing up with doing our student films and our smaller
Yeah,
projects. And when I started, like, kind of the only way you could really get into anything was through, like, the festival circuit, you know what I'm saying? Like
right.
that. And it's just like submit to film festivals and just hope that you can meet more, that kind of thing. And I feel like that's still alive and around, but I feel like now it's, I mean, there was no way to get into television. No way to, I mean, it was only network.
Yeah.
There's absolutely no way. I mean, film was your best bet, and even then it was going to be the smaller stuff. And now, of course, it's probably the opposite. It's probably easier to get into
Right.
episodic,
But also back then it
nowadays.
was just like there were just the three networks and just some cable channels, and then like
Exactly.
just like
Exactly.
what a dozen movies a year, and they're all scored by the same top 10 guys, and all it was just like, and it was
Yeah.
just yeah. So I'm sure it
I
was
mean, it's
just
still
a
kind of that, by the way.
little
It's
bit.
maybe
Yeah, it
more
is.
like the 10 guys and then like a few outliers who sort of orbit. It's
Yeah,
still
but
that.
I think, but that's like, yeah, when you think about like the upper echelon of that, but I think what streaming has done is that, I think outside of the streaming platforms, there's so many different ways to distribute films and shows, whether it's a web series or, I just helped out on my friend's short, and it's just like, it's just, you don't have to just look at it as like we need to get the big studio thing and get it there. And I think people can work and do so many cool, interesting things. And I love seeing everything
Yeah.
from micro budget productions to someone got an investor, and it's like it's great. Yeah.
And I think it's really great too, because I actually feel like for me that a lot of the inspiration comes from the parameters that are put on us. Now, I mean, it's not always
Yeah,
fun, right? Budget, and
sure.
time parameters. It's not like, oh yeah, that's my favorite place to be, when they're out of everything. But at the same time, it does allow us as artists to really like put a lot of parameters up right away. You're not always looking. I mean, you're looking at a blank slate to, in a certain instance, but when your budget's really small and it's like, wow, but I really want to record something live, you start to get really, really creative. And I think that
Yeah,
that's really cool. And I think that a lot of these, smaller productions, they really want that. They want that something, they want the creative, they want something that's really just outside the box thinking, And like, all of us composers, yeah, we all want the big, huge orchestral budget. But I mean, come on, you're missing out on a whole other like
yeah. I mean, I say it's the same
world
thing
of
on the
fun.
filmmaking, I think, side, because you see these directors, whatever, you see a $220 million Marvel movie versus a $10 million passion project that just, you have to get creative. You have to get creative with the effects and the way that your shot list and how many days you have, and it
Yeah,
just like, I think I don't know, that's like the filmmaking spirit to me. It's like we got a deadline, we got a budget, we don't have tons of Disney money to just blow on CGI, and it's like, let's make something cool
exactly.
and unique. So I think it does.
Yeah,
Yeah,
sometimes it becomes about this actual story, because you
yeah.
can't rely on the VFX to finish the story or to create the story, But yeah, it's
Right.
agreed, agreed.
Absolutely. So, so yeah, I mean, after you met Blake, started writing additional music with him, and I mean, you got like a crash course, kind of launched into that Arrowverse and network TV,
Yeah,
I mean, and then eventually co-composing, and now composing, some solo composing some of those shows, and from like Arrow, The Flash, Supergirl, Legends, Tomorrow, Batwoman. I mean, and Riverdale and all these other shows that he was doing, but it's like uh that you got to work on and then kind of helm sometimes, and it's like, what was that like, and how the hell did you guys juggle all of that?
yeah, that was a steep learning curve. I mean, I kind of think of it too, and like, I was doing stuff in my league, like my own little like smaller projects, that kind of thing. But I think it's really like the only way we ever get to grow is if we kind of push ourselves and work, frankly, out of our league.
Yeah,
Hopefully not too far out where we kind of fail upwards, as it were. But
sure.
and there were several times where I really thought I was like, I don't know that this is a lot. I mean, not only it was much more high profile shows, much caliber, higher caliber of story and production, and therefore writing in a lot of ways too. And of course, writing for somebody else, as many people know, if you've ever done additional writing, it's not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah,
Um, and then of course what was really fun, but it was also challenging, was Blake was also saying, hey, come in and help me design the sound of parts of these shows. With Supergirl, that was our first project together. My name was never on it, but I did additional writing, and I helped create some of the sound of like Supergirl's human side, as it were. And all the other shows that you had mentioned as well. but yeah, I mean, it was a steep learning curve, and it was really tricky again to be writing so much music in such a little time, and it didn't just I didn't just slam into just one thing,
Yeah,
that all, it was obviously a gradual thing. But yeah, I mean, I think it helps when if you're working on multiple projects, it helps if they have the same producer and the same, sort of, larger canopy of people that you're answering to, and so the flow becomes the same, the style that, every even down to like editorial, oh, I we know
yeah,
those guys, we know those editors, we know the post-production team, we know the post-production supervisor. It's the same relative people, so that allows it to really, it streamlines a process that's pretty involved to begin with. So anywhere where you can sort of grease the corners, as it were, just to kind of move
yeah,
a little bit faster. And a way to do that, like I said, is if you're working with the same umbrella or under the same umbrella. And I think that Blake really kind of designed his process and work in studio in much the same way as the Greg Berlanti type of thing, which is like, we all had identical rigs, we were all in the same building, we could all, we could all have lunch together and discuss the big crossover event. You know what I'm saying? And we could all do
sure,
it that way, and then we go off to our own rooms, and then, but we all have, a chatting system. We all had a very like an internal thing that it was, with Blake architecting it. We
yeah,
all were able to, to kind of get through that, and that kind of thing. Um, but yeah, I mean, and then as you mentioned, like, branching out, it's, when you work, as I said, out of your league or above your league or whatever you want to, however you want to, call, you learn how somebody who's further along in their career, just learn how they do it. And you're like, okay. And then and for me, I was able to take some of the things that worked for me, that made sense for me, that I resonated with, and then sort of design and figure out my own system as well. And so now, as you said, I've sort of made that leap and that transition into just my own projects
yeah.
and
And
that
now
kind of
you're
thing, and
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 now,
and, and,
yeah.
and have my own team as well. So it's,
Yeah, which is
you know
I love seeing that because yeah, I've been interviewing, I've been doing this on the side as a passion project, film music journalism for like over a decade now, like 11, 12 years now. And it's like I started, talking to people, and I remember I think we crossed paths before when I interviewed Blake, and I don't think you remembered. I remember when we first met again, and I was like, no, we've talked in the past. Like I met, whether it's Steph who worked with Harry, or Batu working with John Powell, and it's just like I see everyone like kind of growing in their careers, and it's I don't know, it just feels good to see everyone kind of on the path and kind of sticking to their
yeah.
craft, and it grows, and it's like it's amazing. And then I've been such a fan of your work, so it's been amazing to see what you did with, like, especially with
Thank
Gremlins, which we'll
you.
talk about, or Kung Fu, and we'll get into some of that stuff. But
Thank
but
you.
before we jump into some projects, I'd love to just kind of talk about, you talked about working with Blake and kind of gathering those skills and fine tuning it and kind of making your kind of process and your approach. So I'm curious, and now I know this is going to be depending on the project, depending on the schedule and everything, but kind of in general, where does the first note come from for you? Like, what is your starting point? Where do you like to, if you have the opportunity and the kind of the grace period, you like to, if you're on early enough, do you prefer to read the script? Do you prefer just to talk to the director or the producer or a showrunner, or do you wait for that first cut, or we wait, to that lock picture, they give it to you? I'm curious, what is your preference if you want to start and kind of start, get those ideas going?
Yeah, I mean, usually I feel like it's so funny because I don't even know if I have a preference, because it's more like, here's what the deal is. Take
Hmm.
it or leave, take it
Right.
or leave.
Yeah. You don't
And
have
so,
a, it's
I
like,
mean, you know, I will say, probably like many of us who do that, who write music to picture, I'm influenced by picture. So if there's no picture to look at, and they want to bring someone on, they want to bring me on before it's even shot, then I definitely want to read a script, because I definitely want to understand a story, and especially if they want music for a set, or if they want music just to kind of marinate or edit to 100%, I definitely want to read, I want to gather any information. But by the time I see the picture, or when I see the picture, all my ideas may or may not work anymore, that I
right.
had, because it just looks different, right? We're all influenced by the color and the texture and the tone and the shooting style and how fast, the pace of it, as well as
Yeah.
the actors. There's certain instruments that just may not work on an actor and a character in that time and place, that so all that gets, sometimes you have to go through another I have to go another round of idea processing. But
Yeah.
for me, it's as you said, it's a creative conversation and that kind of thing. But I have also found that all those conversations are all well and good. Spotting sessions are all well and fine, and they're all very important. But for me, I until until I have some alone time with the project, I can't really like get into it. Like I have to, I think that part of my process really is just diving in, spending time with it, internalizing, just experimenting, figuring out what feels right, or where those pathways are open for me. And so oftentimes I'll just start changing some of the things that we talked about in spotting. Not, I mean, within
Yeah,
reason, especially,
sure.
I don't want to create issues, but sometimes I'll have a different idea that I was like, I couldn't possibly have this in a spotting session or an original creative conversation because I hadn't internalized it. I hadn't spent time. I mean, as we all know, we're the last people to join the
Yeah,
party. So it takes us a minute for me to figure out where my bag is going to go, where's the drink station, where, like, you kind of have to just get your bearings. And so for me, that, that's where a lot of the what do you call it, like the sandbox is being built, and
right.
I definitely start writing if I can, if I have the time, frankly, even if I don't have the time, in fact, especially if I don't have the time, I will still try, because I think it's actually even more and more helpful just to try to write something away from picture. It doesn't have to be a big suite. If I have the time, it could be a 9 or 10 minute suite. If I don't have the time, maybe it's just a few succession of cues where I thought about a scene, but I didn't actually time it to the scene. I watched it and I'm like, okay, put the picture away, or at least, put the timing of it away. Because for me, the free association, the experiment process is paramount for
Yeah,
me. It's
yeah,
paramount for me to get any ideas flowing, because I we already have the parameters that we have, but I need to not have the parameters of the timing of the pic of that scene or that kind of thing. And just to get ideas. And then that way it's, it kind of like, oh, if that's a theme, and just figure out where it plugs in. It's a very Jack Smalley way of working. Jack Smalley was one of my advisors at the USC program, and that was pretty much his method. He's like, no, figure out what your themes are, write those away from picture, figure out where those themes are, and then you start plugging them in. Okay, well, this is this theme, this goes here, this goes here, and it's like, well, that's the theme, and then from there you work out. And okay, that's, I'll give it at the proper start, the proper runway, the proper, outro, as it were. So for me, like I said, to answer long-winded answer, wow, but to where the notes come from,
yeah.
um ideas that are influenced by picture but that are not married to the picture, and initially, and then I start plugging that in and seeing where it works in the rest of the thing. But it's also a great way to get people talking about the music that I'm writing, as opposed to talking about the music that they want me to write.
Right, right.
You know, it's like, okay, we've all had the conversations about what you want to hear and that kind of thing. Let me go away and figure out what I feel like you need to hear based on our conversations, based on what I'm feeling, as, you know, as the person who does the job that I do,
Right. And is writing for you, like, once you when you have that alone time and you kind of locked away, is that like a vulnerable process for you? Do you need to kind of just spend time with your own emotions and with the picture, and try to find things that, because I mean, every time you're trying to find something new that I guess that wasn't, you don't want to rehash, I guess, stuff you've done in the past, or kind of fall into old, practices or anything like that. So you're probably trying to find new places in your head that you can go to, like, pull out a certain, if it's like, especially if it's a heavy emotional subject, not like a comedy or something light, but like, I'm curious for you, is that, and then is it once you go through that and you find something and you're finally happy with it, is it nerve-wracking to present it to your director, to be like, hey, I got it? Or is it more like you're excited to get feedback so that you can start that collaborative process?
it's the worst.
It's the
It is.
worst.
It's, I think the most vulnerable part is that first offer,
Mm,
because it's, this is my idea. What do you think? This is what I created from nothing. What do you think? These are, I mean, and so it's, I think that for me, the vulnerable part is the showing of it, is the show and tell of it.
yeah,
Writing that initial thing for me is actually the hardest thing. It's not, in my opinion, it's not always the funnest, because to me, I'm working just as hard to create something, to go to what you said, to create something that is fitting, is worthy, is new. Am I just regurgitating? Am my hands going to the same place on the piano the entire time?
yeah.
Yes, they are. Am I creating something new, or am I digging into my bag of tricks? Always a bag of tricks. you know and so I'm working just as hard to create something new as I am in making sure, or trying to make sure, that I'm not putting on my editor's hat too early. There's
Yeah,
not the time to be editing. It's not the time to be producing. It's not the time to be second guessing. It's the time to be playing, creating, experimenting, throwing anything out there. And I find that as you just said, a very vulnerable process, and and therefore not always as fun. And then the first offer is awful, and then once you get some kind of feedback, even if it's like, "Ooh, this is great for someone else's movie, Sherry." Like, even if you get
Yeah,
something, you're like, "Okay, at least I have some place to
sure.
start and some, you know, kind of thing." And then from there, I find that process actually a lot better. But there's always that, like, did I write something that I know that I can expand upon, develop? Do I, did I, and then is it like, did I write something that is going to resonate with them as well?
Yeah,
It's hard. It's
it
hard.
is, and I think it's sometimes people, I think with the way the movie industry has gone, especially with the blockbusters, where they're just they are kind of escapist entertainment. But I think when people they sit and then they watch something and it starts to make them cry, or they starts to get them like anxious or tense, and you go like, well, somebody had to craft that. Not just the music, but also the editing and the directing and the color palette. I mean, it's like these are humans behind the scenes making it, and it's like they're getting in those places emotionally too. And I think like I'll be watching a movie and be like, God damn, this screenwriter was going through something, when the script is like talking about
Yeah.
getting existential and about, like it's just like, well, they were in a place when they got to this part. So it's like, and that's the beauty for me. That's why I connected with it as when I was little. It's like, oh, it's like you get to talk to somebody without ever talking to somebody. So when you put your music out in the world and then people listen to it, it's like an indirect way of kind of exposing your emotions and putting it out there and then seeing if it connects with other people. And I think that's the beauty of that. And I think we should talk about the artistic process more, because I think the word art maybe comes with like some, oh, this is pretentious now. I feel like today it's like, oh, it's just artistic, but it's like, no, we're creating art. We're creating stuff that comes from here. And it's like, it should be vulnerable and scary. Yeah.
100%. I no, I completely agree with that.
Yeah.
100%. It is art, and I think the scariest part of it too is it's art and commerce, it's art and
Yeah.
business. So it's like it's not art for your sake, it's art for that sake, for their sake.
Yeah, it's the art.
And
Yeah, but
that's
and as a team, as a honestly, you're working for the story. The story is the boss. So it's like whatever And I remember when I was doing liner notes for, uh, I was doing something with I think it was for the Weatherman. Yeah, it was for the Weatherman with Gore Verbinski and Hans, and we're on a Zoom call and we're just talking. And Gore was like, the picture, once it changes, it tells you what it needs, and it's no longer my picture, anybody's picture. It's like it's its own being, and it's like, how can we give it more? And I thought that was an interesting way to like look at it. Like
yeah.
what's no longer something that we created. It's like it's now alive. We created something, and now we have to give it what it needs. So, but
Yeah, it's so true. It's true. Yeah, because I mean, there's always those unknowns. When I mean, I'm not a filmmaker, but like, there's always those unknowns. That performance from an actor, you had no idea, or that
right, yeah,
we lost that location, but instead it gave us this other thing that we could never have imagined, or we were rushed with the lighting, so we just got this. I mean, it's all kinds of things. I mean,
yeah,
it's a
anything can affect
living,
it.
breathing process. Yeah.
So yeah, you mentioned how it's kind of art and commerce mixed together, and I'm curious from your perspective, having to become not only a composer but also a kind of a businesswoman as well, to just like tackle all of this. And you are the business, you are your brand and everything, but you're managing a team now and you have employees. So it's like, how do you was it like a tricky part to do you have to separate that in your brain, be like, okay, this is the business part of it, and once we make sure everything in its the right place, we can kind of play and become artists again? I'm curious how you kind of look at it and approach it.
That's a good question. I don't know. I guess I've never really thought about it. Everything sort of happens gradually and yet all at once. It's when you
Yeah,
look back, you're like, wow, all that happened. But when you really dissect it, things happen just a little bit at a time. And so, um, yeah, I'm not sure. Sorry, I kind of forgot what the question was. I was going to vamp for a little bit, but
oh no, just how you tackled being a kind of doing the business side of things, like being kind of
oh,
a business side versus artistic side, and like how do you manage
you
that? And
know,
it's
I wonder too. Sorry, and thank you for asking again. I also, because after I did my undergrad, I actually started teaching piano lessons full time.
oh,
And so I was sort of running my own business in a sense, because I was renting from a place.
right,
Well, at first I was actually a traveling piano teacher, and then I would actually go to their houses, and then I decided, oh my gosh, that's a lot. So
yeah,
I rented from a place and had them come to me, and then that kind of thing. And so, that's already running a business. Like I feel like those of us who have been freelancers for a long time. I can't remember a time where I wasn't a freelancer.
Yeah.
We're this perpetually self-employed, and so I feel like we start to understand the business side of our own, just our own business. Like I have to keep my own books. I have to actually,
Yeah.
I had to make sure that like all of my 20 or 30, 40 students pay me, and it's like,
Right.
how do I do that? I mean, and they all have different, so I feel like I started that pretty early on, long before I was able to finally like go to grad school for this for film scoring, and like and actually like transition to this part as my full-time career. And it's like because I think the business side has always for me was always a part, but I wonder if it's been that way for a lot of us in the field, because we've just
Right.
been freelance for so long. And so after a while you kind of realize, oh, this is what this is what it is.
Yeah.
But you're
It's
right.
just
There is that hat we have to take, and that's why it's crazy, because like part of my typical day, it's like I just spend the first part of the day not, I can't even write yet. I have to do all the clerical things. I have to do all
yeah.
those things. And then I end my day with a bunch of clerical as well, to make sure that when people wake up in the morning, they've got what they need to start, which allows me to again, it's just like a daisy chain. You just kind of kick it, volley.
Right.
I just volley
Yeah.
back. There's okay, the ball's in your court now, and then they volley it back. So it's yeah, and you know what? It's so funny, because I think the only time I can ever really separate it truly is just literally when I am writing the thing, writing whatever it is. But the second I come out of it, the second I'm answering an email, I'm now thinking from the business side or the logistical side. It's like, oh, we've got to add a player here. We've got to,
Right.
oh, what's the time for that kind of thing. And that's actually where delegating can really help. If
Right.
if you have a team, or even if it's not a full-time team, it's delegating. It's just like trying to just, is there anything that I can pass on to somebody else that they could possibly do,
Yeah.
to help in that way. But yeah, I think it's important that we all kind of learn how to do it ourselves, so that we
Yeah.
know how to ask someone else to do it, at some point.
I know, and yeah, and having a team is definitely important, especially on these. If the bigger the project, the more moving pieces. And if you have that budget to have a team around you, and yeah, it's definitely integral for sure.
Yeah, yeah,
Well, yeah, but I want to jump into a few projects. I'd love to. I know we talked about this on our panel, but now that we're here recording this, I'd love to jump into Gremlins, because I think your score for Gremlins, Secret of the Mogwai, it's a beautiful score, and it's its own
yeah,
thing. And the show is its own thing. And even though it's inspired by the original Joe Dante films, it's just a completely different world. So I'm curious about, what was it like coming onto this project, and what were those first conversations of the score going to be like? And everyone has kind of, especially when people didn't know, they hear they're making a Gremlins, Max series that's kind of animated, and it takes place, in the past, looking at it's this period kind of adventure, series. So I'm curious, what were the
yeah.
conversations about it? How much of the original series was going to be in there, whether it's the tone and the humor, and of course Jerry's music, and how were you able to kind of, with your show team, be able to build out that brand new series?
Yeah, I mean, it's cool, because I think they all had the same. I think everybody in every department had the same type of conversation, which was like, we all know the original movies. We all want to pay homage to it. We all want to make sure that we're keeping in line with the legacy and the mythology and the that kind of thing. And that went from, I could tell from the stories and the characters to the all of the rules about the Mogwai, and then also to the music. And it was like, so it was the same kind of thing. It was like, but we want to do that, but we're also making our own thing and putting our own stamp on it. And that was really essentially the direction. Their biggest note initially was, we really want to push all of the emotion. And I think originally I had thought, oh yes, of course they want to pull the heartstrings and make us cry and make us laugh, that kind of thing. But they also really wanted to make it scary. They
Yeah.
really, which I think if you think about it, it's a very Amblin way. It's a very, to
Yeah.
put kids in these sort of like grown up situations and take it all seriously. And it's like, no, this is a really bad thing. Like, I mean, their lives are literally in danger. They're literally fighting for justice. They're literally trying to figure out what the right thing to do is, or what their destiny or what their calling is, and that kind of thing. And they're really going on like real adventures. And that's essentially what it kind of felt like. And I think in the movies, or at least in the Amblin way in general. And so a lot of it was about like, no, take this seriously and really push the emotion. If it's horror, if it's nightmarish, lean into that, lean into the mystery, lean into the scare tactics. So lean into all of the emotions. And that was kind of their biggest directive. And then in terms of Jerry's music, I mean, they no one ever really said, we really want this to be a continuation of Jerry Goldsmith's score. We want it to
Right.
be, no one ever said that. We did discuss the two themes that were going to be used. One was the Gremlins rag, which actually was only used in the opening title and end title. So I just did an arrangement of Jerry's theme for that, and then Gizmo's lullaby. Gizmo's lullaby. The actors, the Mogwai actually do sing it in various places. The characters do,
Yeah.
and so a lot of it was about accompanying that moment or fulfilling that moment. But they did I mean, for me personally, it was like, how do I really, honor what has come before? And when I did a lot of thinking about it, Jerry's music is so thematic, and it's also just like sort of unapologetically in the moment. And
Yeah.
where it's like, if it's heartfelt, it's just like, wow, it's the sweetest thing, ever. And then when it was like crazy with the gremlins and the evil gremlins and that kind of
Yeah.
thing, it was really like nuts. It was kind of for me, it was kind of like, I think that was the biggest way that I felt like, oh, I can really make some bold statements with some bold themes, and that was going to be something that I think was going to fit into what had come before. But it's honestly just, it was such a dream project. It has been such a dream project, and I say that not because it didn't have its difficulties, or that it wasn't challenging, or it was easy or anything like that. But
Sure.
it was one of those career highlight projects where you're given all of creative permission to just do what you do and do what you think and what you feel. And the notes that were given back were just always very, um, collaborative. And I honestly felt that the notes made it better. I'm like, oh, that's a really great note. I wouldn't have
Yeah.
seen it that way or thought of it that way. And just again, artistically, it was like, we're open to whatever you want to do, provided it supports what the story is. And so, and I just also think it was one of those career highlight. It was just one of those lightning in a bottle moments for me, because I feel like I just connected with the project so much that it was like, that language is my language. And it's like when you meet like a best friend, you're like, oh my
Right.
gosh, how did I not know you growing up? Like how did we find each other now? And we finish each other's sentences. And that's kind of what that project has been for me, which is, I just felt like, say no more. I get it. I know what to do here. I know what to do. And I just felt like we're just like best friends finishing each other's sentences in that way.
Yeah, absolutely. So I mean, talk to me about like how did you kind of paint the palette of Gremlins? What were kind of the things about the animation or the story that stood out to you, and how much were you going to lean into kind of the cultural sound? How much were you going to lean into kind of maybe traditional adventure stylings, or how were you going to put your voice in there? I'm curious, how did you build the kind of the sonic palette, and then I guess approach the entire arc of the series? Yeah.
Yeah, a lot of it was like a little bit was it was a creative conversation, right? We were like, gosh, Jerry's the first score that Jerry did about on Gremlins, the first movie was very like 80s synth, and I was like,
Yeah.
we all agreed that wasn't going to work for this story. Not only were we in like the 1920s in Shanghai, so
Right.
the 80s synth isn't really going to work in like the 1920s. You could probably have made it work in an Asian setting, but I don't know about the decade. I don't think that was right. But also, we kind of agreed that it wasn't like an orchestral sound was something that was going to support their adventures and the drama the most. Um, and I think the best, or the most effectively. And so obviously, when you come to orchestra, depending on who you ask, some people say, oh, that's a very conventional or very traditional type of score, but it's also a timeless score when you think about it. I mean,
Yeah.
like, in the sense of like, when you have an orchestral score, quote unquote, it's kind of timeless. We've had orchestral scores since, well, yeah, I mean, okay, not since the dawn of moving pictures, talking pictures, or what, pictures that had music, but I mean, violins. I mean, this music, this classical sense of, it has been
Yeah.
around for such a long time that it's like it becomes slightly cultural less, slightly time less, decade less. Um, the specifics on. So I felt like we kind of agreed that was going to be the best approach globally. But then we have to what you were asking about, like, the cultural aspect and the location, the geography aspect of it being in China. And that was something that we all wanted to lean into. And they're like, hey, don't be afraid to really just kind of dive into that. We really
Yeah.
want to support that. So there were definitely some times where it was like, okay, I'm going to really lean into that and make it as supportive, but yet as Asian influenced, cultural specific as I can. And then there's also using some of the instrumentation, using an erhu player, or an erhu, using some of the Chinese flutes, bamboo flutes, and some of the percussion. I'll be the first to call it out and say it was nothing that was completely novel. You know what I'm saying? Like in
Sure.
terms of
Yeah.
instrumentation, it's like, okay, this is not a unique approach. But I think it's all just to say it's what we do with it, and hopefully that stands out to be a stamp on the show itself. But yeah, using instrumentation, I did use, I did kind of stay a bit more in our Western harmonic language, but there were definitely times where it was like, oh, I can really lean into a different harmonic language,
Mm.
for this type of thing. But just to making it accessible to all, making it approachable to all, but also just, celebrating the Chinese culture, and which is what the story did in a lot of ways too. They had a lot of fun with that. So it
Yeah.
was really fun to do the same thing in supporting that musically.
Yeah, I think it took something that was like such a small, because it was just like a little nugget of information in the first Gremlins, where it's like, oh, he bought it from this old Chinese man's store, like, and you just like and it's like, oh, what was the whole thing behind that? When you think about like doing an origin story, like that's something interesting to me. It's like, oh, that was never. I don't know if maybe in the Bible they had an idea of where Gizmo came from or something, and maybe Joe Dante knew, but we didn't know. But like to have that, like and explore that, I think it's completely different than what the zany kind of stuff that Joe Dante did with the live action thing. So yeah,
Yeah,
and
yeah,
when you say I'm so happy you got an orchestra, to be able to use an orchestra, because like you said, like certain synths, certain technology dates things, even though you can make technology work in different settings, and you can have like a modern synth score for something like that. But like, yeah, I was just thinking about that, especially with special effects too. I think it's the same thing when you use visual effects, and if you're not doing it well or integrated enough, like I was comparing the original thing versus the 2011 remake, and you say like, well, that's immediately dated, but you go back to the practical stuff, and it still looks how it looked today if you did it practically. So I think that's an
yeah.
interesting to compare it with an orchestra, and using samples or technology and stuff like that. So for sure.
Totally. Yeah, no, 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 totally. And you're right. I was very fortunate to that the studio and the was just really on board, and even Amblin and Warner Brothers Animation were both really on board for the supporting, with live instruments. And it makes a difference. It really, really does.
Yeah, it does.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah,
Absolutely. Well, you also
for
got
sure.
to outside of Gremlins, you got to score in another amazing series, Kung Fu, which I thought was a fantastic approach and
Yeah.
everything. So, what was like and working on something like that, which is in a different world than kind of animated adventures.
Yeah, I mean, in some ways, like they're a lot alike, right? In the sense of like, okay, there's definitely some mythology and legend and need for CGI, as it were. I mean,
Right.
obviously with
Yeah.
with an animation, it's all drawn anyway. But there was definitely some mystical powers, afoot, and that's kind of really fun about Kung Fu as well. That I mean, it's cool. I mean, there was also a creative discussion to have to include some Asian elements, and I also
Sure.
used the same erhu player and the percussion. I actually brought in a bunch of, um, you know, Chinese drums and instruments to really add to the score, as much as possible. And with that one, I actually ended up using a string quartet in a way that I really wanted to bring something live, string wise to the show. And I really didn't want to use it as a sweetener. I didn't want
Mhm.
to just use it, but I mean, there were some times that I did, but I really wanted to like feature some real some soloistic work. So it actually started out as like as a violin and a cello, and then the air ho, and then I was like, "Ooh, let's go big and add a quartet," for the for,
Yeah.
for the last couple of episodes, and then of the first season. And then I was like, actually, this is a really fun way to do stuff. And so I was able to kind of do some sort of more experimental and avant-garde type of stuff for the show. And once again, another dream job where it was like, support the drama that we have, but really we're really open to your creative suggestions and creative ideas. And it's just not every project that where you really really get to, it's not every project where you're not only given permission to do it, but the story itself gives you permission. So
Yeah. Yeah.
there was a lot of ways to kind of to do that. And so you know um it was nice. And of course, it has a female lead and she's kicking butt, and it's just really fun. And so um it's hugely fun show that you know, another instance too, story wise, where a lot of things were shown instead of told. You know, it's like
Right,
you
right.
could see some, you could see the authenticity in it. You know, I'm half Chinese, and so I know some of this stuff. You know, it's like
Yeah.
you like, oh yeah, yeah, no, we do that. I grew up that way. My dad definitely did that. You know, kind of thing. It's kind of neat. You know, connecting in that way.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, growing up with, I grew up in a multicultural household too. Like my dad was Turkish, mom was Polish, so you get these like you get like two sides of, but you're also first generation growing up in America, so it's like you're just kind of mixed in with all these different influences, but it also helps define kind of your tastes and everything as well. So yeah, for sure.
Absolutely, absolutely.
So you and you also have another you have a show on NBC, Found, which is a
Yeah,
another awesome series that's taking a look at missing person cases. So I'm curious, how did you? Would it be fair to call it a procedural? I'm curious, like how did you?
totally. Yep.
Yeah.
It's
So I'm
a
curious, like
straight up procedural.
so yeah, what was it like? We people love procedurals because you can just jump into the episode and just the story's there. It's kind of contained. So I'm curious how you approach something like that versus something like Kung Fu or Gremlins, which probably have story season arcs and stuff like that. So I'm curious, and there will be found even as Law and Order, there's arcs that kind of do play along. But I'm curious how you approach Found
Yeah.
versus your other series.
Yeah, no, that's yeah. I mean, you found is the story was much more grounded. I mean, it's reality. There's no,
Sure.
I'm sure there's VFX, but there's no need for to make something too unbelievable or wait, sorry, something on just too unbelievable, very believable.
Right.
And so it's very grounded. And so I think that's musically, I'm not even really sure what that does, but it does change the sound a little bit too. I think I mean, just even the characters are different and the locations are different. And to your point about the like the arc, the bigger arc, it was it. I think it's a fascinating show and story because maybe some people have seen it, and I don't know where we are in the airing of it, so I don't want to give anything away. But there is some dark. I mean, there's darkness in the very very beginning where you find out that where Gabby Mosley, who's the main character, we find out pretty early that she was abducted when she was younger, and
Right.
then we immediately find out that she's now keeping her captor in the basement, so she's now abducted him, and it's really interesting because it kind of, and I think something a through line for all of these stories, and I think a through line what makes stories really good is when it really dives into the struggle of what it means to be a human being, I mean these
Yeah.
conflicting ideas in the case of Found, conflicting ideas of what is what is right and what is wrong, and it's like and justice, and what is justice, and then how do you deliver justice in the right way or the wrong way, or and as we know, and sometimes justice can't be delivered unless it's the quote unquote wrong way. It's just the idea of exploring the darkness in a human being, but also the good in the human beings, and how all the characters of this show came together, or the characters in the show, like what they all have individual stories of what made them decide that they want to make sure that this never happens again to somebody else. And my approach to it, from the very beginning was, the show is called Found, but it's actually really about the missing. It's actually really about the ones
Yeah.
that haven't been found, or that no one's even going to look for, and it's and why that happens, and again, just the value of human life, and who deserves to be found, or everyone deserves to be found, and that's the point of the show. But our culture, our society is often saying that person isn't pretty enough. They don't identify
Sure.
as this, it's the wrong neighborhood, it's the wrong ethnicity, it's the wrong gender, whatever it is. Does this homeless person deserve to be found? Does this transgender,
Sure.
like all that kind of thing? And they just go right into it and tackle it. And that's it's a very present day and a very important, thing to kind of dive into. So it's not about the mystical or, that kind of thing, but it still tackles the same heavy shit.
Yeah, absolutely. And so for something like that, do you kind of have to find that line where the music might be doing too much? Like you don't want to get too big and too maybe manipulative or too overtly emotional because you want to let the story kind of have the kind of that grounded feeling still. So do you have to kind of toe that line, or like how big can I be and how small does the score need to be? I'm curious, like to find, I guess,
No,
the
I just go
tone.
right for it.
Yeah.
I just go big or go home.
Big
I mean,
sweeping
big
themes.
sweeping. Let's do it. Yeah. I mean, it's so funny because I feel like you can make a theme out of anything, right? We
Yeah,
all
yeah,
know we know some of the most famous. One of the most famous themes is two notes. But if you just hammer it in, it's a theme. If you
yeah,
hammer in an idea, it becomes a theme. It's just like a headache, right? It's like all of a sudden your headache's gone, and you're like, wow, I kind of miss my head. I kind of miss that
yeah.
familiar pain. You know, well, all that to say, I don't know why I went there, but like all that to say, I feel like it's like no, I mean it's go big, and for me anyway, this go big on that show too. It's like go big, drive it home, because there's some darkness here, and that was the
Yeah,
biggest thing I wanted to kind of lift out of it, was like, because I wanted the lighter moments to really really shine through when a child, or when somebody is found, or when the right thing has been done, and you can really really feel that weight lifted. And so for me it's like, no, I just drag it down. I just like plow in there and just drag the
yeah,
whole thing down so that we can feel the lightness when it's there. So
absolutely.
no, there's no tone of line. I'm just manipulate, manipulate, manipulate.
Which is I love actually. So I think
So I
I
mean,
remember some old God, there was some old roundtable discussion. I think it was with Hans and James Newton Howard. It was like when like Batman or Dark Knight came out or something, or Batman Begins, and they're I forget where it was, but they're talking about like some there was some panel and some guy, it was like either a film critic or somebody was like, I hate it when music is too big and too loud and does everything for you, and then it just like cuts to Hans and James, and like you talk about the two loudest like composers, like
yeah,
and it's like they do that's their bread and butter, which I love. I mean, I don't consider it
yeah.
emotional manipulation, but in a certain sense, it's like let the I want to give you my hand and let the filmmaker take me on a journey and take the whole team. I want to
Look, I mean,
surrender to the story, essentially, kind of thing.
yeah, well, and that's refreshing, because the truth is like, I feel like for any of us when we watch something, I feel like you enter into this unspoken agreement that I agree to be told a story. I agree to be led. I
Yeah,
agree to be
yeah,
manipulated. I agree to be lied to. And this sounds all dark, and I don't mean it quite as heavy as I'm saying, but like when I go into a theater as a captive audience, or whether I sit at home on my couch watching whatever show, I want, as you just said, I want to be taken
yeah,
on a journey. So if the
exactly.
music is going to help push me in that direction, let's do it. Let's go. I'm
Yeah,
on board. And if I don't want to be manipulated, I turn it off. I mean,
right, right.
I feel like there's no reason to shy away from it. It's what the people want.
Yeah, and
It's
people have that in their like people's favorite. Like, oh, I know, like I know this movie is going to make me cry. I can watch that if I need an emotional release. I know that this movie is going to get me really tense and everything because the way it's edited. So like
Yeah,
you go for those. You want if I want to feel something, and I know that's going to make me feel it. I'm going to go for it. It's almost like a
exactly.
drug in a way. It's like I know what's going to do to me, and I want that to feel like that. And yeah,
Exactly. This
yeah.
100%, 100%. I feel that way.
Absolutely.
Absolutely.
So I'm just curious. I mean, you worked on streaming shows, you worked on network TV, you worked on cable. Is there a difference in terms of like schedules and how chaotic it is, or is it all just kind of like that kind of just it's a TV pace and it's kind of keeps you on your toes all the time? But I'm curious if it's one is more hectic than the other because of linear versus streaming. I'm curious.
My experience has been like that they're all kind of, hectic. I will say that it depends, right? Obviously, in a network setting, my experience has always been, oh no, you're not missing any deadline, and there's no
Right.
time to go back, because you
Yeah.
deliver this and a week later it's on the air. So that's, and any, but the good news is that usually everybody on that is understands that they're on that pace, so they're not missing their deadlines. The editorial's not missing their, post, no, nobody's missing their deadlines,
Yeah.
because so I'm getting the stuff that I need in the amount of time that we've all agreed upon, so that, but I have to deliver, so there's that, and it's a lot of music in a very very short amount of time. So that's something I noticed about cable, about network streaming. It's one of those things where it's like it can be a smattering of that, or so like, with Gremlins, I was given a gloriously amount, like a luxurious long amount of time, for like about 4 to 6 weeks between each delivery. But
Hmm.
4 to 6 weeks, I mean, that music was much, for me, that was much more challenging. It was much more
Sure.
involved. Plus, I lost a week and a half for, you know, orchestration and recording and mixing. So there's that. And then also, and just approval process. And it was, so I didn't really have as much time, but the music was also, it took longer. It was much more muscular in that way. But then you're right. But then I've done another streaming show called Based on a True Story, and that was streaming only. And I was actually the cool thing about that one is I was able to go back and sort of retrofit older ideas in later episodes and bring them and incorporate them into the newer one or into the
Yeah.
earlier episodes because I was able to go back. But it wasn't really originally supposed to be that way, and it
Right.
was an incredibly tight schedule. And that's kind of it was almost like every episode was happening at the same time, so it was an incredibly truncated schedule that because it was so and everything was happening, I could like, oh, let me go back real quick and like put that in there, that kind of thing. So yeah, it was crazy. I mean, it's all crazy. It's all nuts. But I can't think of, I mean, yeah, I would say the projects that have not been as nuts have been most of my film projects. Most of my film projects have been ones where it was like, you get some dicey areas,
Yeah.
but most of the time it's been we're clipping along at a decent pace. Everyone's got the time. So and I think it helps that I write fast. It's just something I think I've learned to do. I think it was actually, to be honest, something that I've always been able to do, but I think the craft was honed in working in television a lot in episodic. I think it
Yeah,
was
I
like, oh
think the
yeah, I was
TV,
just
yeah, the TV boot camp definitely,
yeah, exactly.
Those early Blake Day trainings have come in handy.
I mean, yeah, and I think the way to do it, and by the way, writing fast is not always, you don't need to do that all the time. You know what I'm saying? It
Sure.
shouldn't always be like that. A lot of that had to happen because some of the projects were a bit on top of each other. But if you
So it's a
can
choice
work
for
on
you. Like
one.
if you'd rather have more time, you would, but you don't, you write fast only when you need to, essentially, right? Or is that,
Yeah, but I mean, it's that kind of like, time age old story of just like the project expands or shrinks to the time that
yeah.
you have. So if you
Oh
if you're
yeah, yeah,
given
yeah.
2 months on a project, you're going to take 2 months, and if you're given 2 weeks on it, you're or 2 days, it'll take two
That's
days. Like
have you
that's what
is
it'll
it
take.
has 2 days been a turnaround for you? Have you have to turn something around two
I
days?
mean, not the turnarounds for those is in like a certain number of like no, or we want to add cues, or like we want to add cues, so maybe they're adding about you know 4 or 5 minutes, or change certain things, and it needs a turnaround of, yeah. So I mean, no, I've not done it. I've done episodes in 2 days, but I don't recommend that. I mean, I don't recommend it for the music either. It's easier to do it if you're in subsequent seasons because you
Yeah.
at least have some things already figured out, that kind of thing. But yeah, it's a it's
Yeah.
a
The
it's
machine's
it's a
already moving at
journey.
that point.
Yeah, exactly. And but I think a lot of it is just like, trusting your gut, going with the gut
Yeah.
instinct, um, or just being able to just, it's an idea. It does not have to be the best idea. It's got to be an idea that works,
Right.
and a lot of it's just psychological and mental, and it's just being able to say, I'm going with this, and I'm just gonna, come hell or high, this you're get this theme is gonna fit in here, um but
Yeah.
also I've always looked to my mentors, and I think the longer you do something, you have get more tricks up your sleeve, and then sometimes, unfortunately, you kind of have to fall back on some of those tropes that, I don't love
Sure.
that. That's why more time
Yeah.
is better, because then you can say, I don't want to do it that way. I want to do it some different way. But
Yeah, especially with episodic TV, where I mean, and it's not like a criticism, but sometimes even the storylines can be a little, formulaic in certain things. If you have to, because the writers are also under crazy deadlines, and so are the editors and everybody working on it. It's a lot to make, and I think
it's a
people
lot.
need to realize how much work, goes into all of that, and to turn that around, I think I mean, when you see that show premiere or even a film premiere in a theater, it's a miracle that it got there. Everything had to get it done. It's like it's impressive. Like once it's finished.
100, it's right. It is very impressive, and then
Yeah,
we all just consume it. We're just like, meh, that was lame. I didn't
I
like
know.
that
It's like
show.
it's
It's like,
like 2 hours of your life is like 2 years of
gosh,
somebody else's
I
life, and I think
know, I know. We're just so flippant, and we're so cavalier about it. I try not to be like that when I'm a viewer, when I'm just like solely an audience member. I really try and say, wow, that was really, try and look and say like, wow, that's a lot of work that went into it. But
yeah,
but
even
I'm
and
guilty. I'm guilty of it as well.
no, and it's everyone should be. I mean, and that's the thing. It's meant to be consumed. It's meant to be put out there, and that's what connects us. And people, if they don't like it, they don't like it. If they love it, it's like that's why I think it's so stupid to just argue about what's best and what's not. But it's like because it's like
I
food. It's like
know.
you either like it or you don't. Is that what's your taste? What is your? It's so subjective, and I think
Yeah.
the critic culture and all that of just like, you know, bashing things for the sake of bashing them. But yeah, you can disagree with it and not like it, and that's totally fine. But
I know. But it right, it's its own art is bashing something like not even
yeah, people love watching it too. People love watching on YouTube. People are just bashing something because, like, I don't know. I guess humans are just, we just love to, if we don't like it, we want to find someone else who doesn't like it, or vice versa. If we love it, we
I
want to find somebody
know.
else who loves it and just compare and contrast notes, I guess.
I
But
know. What is that about?
yeah.
Our dark humor.
Yeah. Well, speaking of consuming things, I guess to wrap up our conversation, I'd love to know, you know, I know we started about talking about kind of your early path, but I'm just want to maybe touch base, like touch up, see what you love. I mean, I'm curious, like, what are some of the movies that to this day, like you, not something you essentially had to grow up on, but something that you love personally that you still, if somebody asks you what your favorite movies are, your favorite scores or favorite TV series, I'm curious what would be like your maybe top five or something. I know it'd be impossible to pick one. So what are things that are just like you've carried with you throughout your entire life that still kind of like are so meaningful to you?
Yes, Joe Wright's Pride and Prejudice with Keira Knightley,
Oh, yeah.
score by Dario Marinelli. Oh my gosh, I just think it's a flawless film. I mean, like
Yeah.
everything from the story to the acting to the editing to the lighting, the sets, the music. I mean, everything is just flawless. I'd watch that all like just anytime. Sure, we can put that on.
Yeah.
One of my favorite TV series is Buffy the Vampire Slayer.
That's awesome.
Just
Yeah.
it's so good. It's so good. Um, I've recently, in general, I love, like Born Identity type. Well, I love Born Identity, but I also love the Born Identity types of shows, you know, like that kind of thing. And I
Yeah,
love that
like an
just kind of,
espionage thriller, like,
yeah, secret agent, you
yeah.
know. Alias was a great show
Oh,
that
Alias,
I did.
yeah.
I loved that, and I loved what Giacchino always did about all the different locations, and he would always do it. It was essentially like a bumper, you know, but he
Yeah,
would
yeah.
always like, oh, we're in Morocco, and he would do. It was a great education, and and like
Yeah.
different types of ways to do it. Gosh, I had so many more I was going to mention, but now I can't seem to
Yeah,
remember.
they
But
come and
you know,
go.
I will tell you, like, you know, I didn't realize until I was sort of listening to some Jerry Goldsmith scores how many of his movies I'd actually grown up watching. I mean, think of
Yeah.
The
The
Burbs is such a
Burbs.
great, oh
Yeah.
my gosh, it's so great. But anyway, yeah, I mean, pretty much anything that James Newton Howard does, I'm like, pretty much anything that
Yeah.
John Powell does, I'm like, yeah,
Yeah.
just Splot. Oh my gosh, these guys.
These guys.
These guys, what are you
And
guys eating and drinking over there? I want some, you know, it's just
uh,
so
no, those are great.
inspiring.
Those are absolutely great answers. Yeah, I mean, I think it's, yeah, I think it's important to talk about and I've talked to composers sometimes, like, oh, I don't have time to watch stuff, but it's like, I feel like you should make time, especially, I know everyone's busy and stuff, but it's like it's great to see what other people are doing and appreciate other people's work. Yeah.
I spent several years, honestly, admittedly, not watching anybody else's work.
Yeah. I mean,
it was such a difficult time. But now I come out of it and I'm like, I completely agree with you. I mean, and even if like you want to take a break from watching other people, you know, because I'll admit sometimes like you almost don't want to go see that big thing because that person is great because the
sure.
magic starts to get a little bit lost and we can start to see like, you know, 5M38, you know, we can start to just like, you know, see, you know, behind the curtain and
Yeah.
it sometimes, I'm not saying it loses its magic, but sometimes we just need to like to kind of rest our brain in that way.
Yeah, our
But
creative
at the
brain.
very
Yeah.
least, yeah, great. But at the very least, go listen to live music. I love like just going to
Oh yeah.
concerts and stuff like that. It's so important. Just you know, experiencing that the energy around us of like a live setting is I think is really good. I've recently I'm a newcomer to Jacob Collier in like the past couple of years, and I'm like, oh my gosh, it's just fascinating to watch him and all of, not just him as a solo act, but all of his band and his
Yeah.
music and that kind of thing. So anyway, I find all that stuff inspiring. I think that kind of stuff really inspires me for like just moving into going back into the work of what I do.
Yeah, absolutely. And I'm so fortunate we live in a city too that has a lot of that, you know, where we can go to the Disney Music Hall or to the Bowl or see, you know, the biggest
Yeah.
star, pop star come in or go see the LA Phil, and his music is just kind of everywhere here. So it's a thing that we shouldn't take for granted. So yeah, people should go out and see those things and
Yeah,
support, live musicians and live performances, because it's an art, but it's also, I mean, it helps you reset, I think, your brain, and also, it's a great thing to just take in the music.
100%.
Yeah.
Yes, yes,
Absolutely.
agreed, agreed.
Absolutely. Well, Sherri, thank you. I mean, we've covered so much ground tonight, and we've covered,
Yeah.
your path to composing a lot of your projects, and thank you so much for all your insight. And it was such a fun conversation. So yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity and the platform. And it's, everyone loves to talk about themselves. But I mean, no, but I mean, it's just, it's really fun to share. And I've been so fortunate that the projects that I have I've just been inspired by everything, and I'm fortunate to work as well. So I really appreciate the opportunity to share that. So thank you.
Absolutely.